to go have pizza during class, and I'm like, skip class? What? I'm so no wonder you're a back row sitter. So anyway, and I was going to tell more jokes, but I have my teenager's voice in my head saying, "Mom, you are not funny." So we'll leave it at that. So I'm going to introduce our panel today, and we're really pleased to have them. And excuse the reading glasses; it's one of those hazards of getting older. So, oh, sorry, I have one. So everybody picture your mother now, okay? So Watersheds hasn't had a hospitality suite since pre-COVID. While it hasn't returned officially, have you heard this announcement already? Yes. Okay, you had. So, okay, so it seems like our late night socializing has come up to a new level of a decibel level. So please keep your noise level down after 11 p.m. Okay. Okay. So on the room floors, in your rooms. So I'm pretty sure I had turned in by then, but I hear lots of fun was had last night. So, okay, so I'm no longer your mother. So I'd like to introduce Jen Shanahan is the Senior Watershed Planner of the City of Fort Collins Natural Areas Department. And Jen works on a variety of projects related to the department's floodplain properties, aquatic resources, and management of its water assets. And if you want their full bios, I think they're in the program. But I got permission to not read the whole thing. Julie Baxter is the Water Resources Manager for the City of Steamboat Springs. She leads water rights and supply planning, water conservation, watershed and stream protection, and water quality permit compliance for the city. Sean Cronin is the Executive Director for the St. Vrain and Left-Hand Water Conservancy District. Sean serves on the Interbasin Compact Committee, IBCC, there'll be a quiz after, is the past chair of the South Platte Basin Roundtable and on the board of the Left-Hand Watershed Center. And last but not least, April Long is the Executive Director of the, she just told me how to say that, Ruedi Water and Power Authority, a consortium of the local governments in the Roaring Fork Basin that works to protect the water resources of the Roaring Fork watershed. So with that, we'll go ahead and turn it over to this great panel.
Hello? Hello? Okay. Hi, so thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm just going to kick us off as I had this idea this spring to reach out to April, Sean, and Julie with this kind of intangible, a little bit crazy idea. It's not the typical concept that I usually present on. And the reason I reached out to them is because I was doing some reflecting on my own job, what I do in my job. And in my work for the Natural Areas Department, I am lucky to be able to dabble in all of the different spheres, so science, policy, field assessments, planning, project management, and representation of our organization externally. And that's the thing that I absolutely love about my job, but at the same time, I was sort of lamenting the fact that I was no longer, not sure I ever really was, but I'm certainly not a specialist anymore, so I'm wallowing in this world of being a generalist, and in the role that I have as interfacing with various projects, I was starting to think about what is the value of the work local government staff that the four of us do to bring complex projects to the finish line. And so I invited Sean and April and Julia to have a conversation, and they were intrigued and they took the bait at their own risk. And we've had a few conversations, and they've been really fun and interesting. And so today, we're going to do a little bit of reflecting back on ourselves and a bit of making fun of ourselves and possibly making fun of you all. So take a little bit lightly here. This is a journey, it's a bit of a therapy journey for everybody that showed up in the room. So title of our talk is Bridge Over Troubled Waters, because what we do in these roles of ours is to make a lot of connections, serve like the bridge or the runner between different disciplines in these complex, multifaceted projects. As we spoke, we ended up talking about personality tests and learned a few things about each other and some commonalities that we all have that makes us thrive and stay in these jobs. And one of the things that came up was through the StrengthsFinder test. I don't know if you're all familiar with that. 3 out of 4 of us have this trait called the woo factor, which is pretty funny to talk about. But the woo factor, as you can imagine, is the person at the party that's going around talking to all the folks. And I read a little more about that. It's really about connecting with people, but then moving on to the next person and connecting with them. And so apparently we are wooful, those of us up here. And I think that's a big part of serving to bridge make these connections and connect the dots.
Jen, can I quickly ask, does anybody else in the room have woo?
All right. Nice. So without further ado, I am going to, I forgot about this slide. This is here to remind us all that if you're at this conference, you are probably pushing new paradigms in the work where you work. We all are working with scarce resources, and we're trying to do things differently. And as a reminder, we've come a long way because we're not doing this. So the talk today, or our panel discussion, is divided into 2 parts. The first part is about what do we call this? Key ingredients to making a project successful. And Julie's going to lead us through that portion. And the second portion is, again, that reflective portion on the personalities that like this role as a generalist. And so what professional skills do we need to work on, do we need to bring to the table, or do we like bringing to the table, and what skills do we enjoy out of this job? So with that.
Okay, so we all were thinking about our roles as program managers and project managers, and what helps to get really complex and kind of game-changing projects, what's successful. And so we came up with a list of ingredients, and this is not a comprehensive list, and there's like a caveat to each one of them, but we see them as like important things. And so they are a nerd, a captain, Debbie Downer, beavers, fairy dust, and duct tape. Are you glad you're here? Yeah. Okay, so let's start with the nerd. All right, so that foundation in science and or engineering that helps us understand the problem, what the need is, and potential solutions and approaches to addressing it, that is just so important to have throughout your project, because you need that credible data source. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard like, well, how do you know what a healthy river is? Or who said that's a healthy river? And so having that like Mark Beardsley's work to point back to is like, here's our assessments. And it's really critical because you do so much educating of your elected officials and your colleagues and the public. And one of the reasons I really love to come to this conference, because this is where a lot of nerds hang out, and I can learn about what everybody's talking about and what's successful in other places, and then be able to come back to Steamboat and the Yampa Basin and think about what are the opportunities here. And I mean, among a lot of competing priorities, how am I going to spend what's worth my time and attention to try to push forward? So, could you guys have a story on?
I think I'm on the nerd topic. I don't know how I got this one, but I think our message here is that we all just encourage each other, and looking back at our past work is to really dig in and bring the best technical folks to the table. And I think if you're at this conference, you probably are already, to not compromise on that. And I feel like in the long run, that really helps you develop rapport when you deliver your projects, because you've got some really strong science or technical folks on your teams. And in Fort Collins, I've been really fortunate. It's like a mecca of natural resource nerds and watershed nerds, and CSU is there. So I have really been able to build some great teams. And I think that's our concept here is the nerds bring the detail, they help you help you tell the story. But then there comes a point when I feel like you need to put the nerds in the closet. And you be your general self and then do some translation.
Sorry, nerds.
And Sean informed me yesterday. He said, well, Jen, you're a nerd. Well, you used to be one. I was like, I don't know if that's a compliment or not. But I think that segues us to the next one.
Do you guys have anything to add?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
We may come back to some of these. Like, we feel like we probably need to get a lot of it going first before we say anything that's too damaging. But yeah, it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
We're putting together an entire team of people, right? Okay.
Okay. The next thing you need to have on your team is a captain, and this is your trusted messenger. Because it doesn't have to always be you. It doesn't have to always be our role. But having that sort of authority figure that's trusted in the community, where they listen to what this person has to say. And in my example was thinking about. So I used to work in natural hazards mitigation and wildfire and floodplain planning. And you talk a lot about risk communication and risk perception, and who does the public really trust to give them information about risks and what they should do about it. And always when you ask that question, you give them a bunch of examples, it's the local fire officials. That's who they want to hear from, that can come door to door and tell them. And so when I would talk to communities about considering development regulations related to wildfire mitigation, I would always make sure the fire chief was there with me with the same messages, because that's who the elected officials and the public wanted to hear it from. Anybody have a good example of the captain?
The surveys will always say, a local government's trusted more than the state government, it's trusted more than the federal government. But by and large, in our experience with local projects, is a neighbor is going to be much more trusted in terms of these projects and create more of a personal experience. A few examples: when I first came out of college, I was coordinating the 319 program for North Carolina and doing water quality stuff, and I was sort of a snot-nosed, smart college kid going to farmers and saying, can we fence your cattle out of the stream because it's going to improve the river? And they looked at me like I had three heads, and I had a Boston accent. In North Carolina, I got nothing going for me. And we had a public meeting much like this, and they were all there like this, sitting there, and we were saying, we're with the government, we're here to help you, and we're going to give you money, and we're going to fence you out, and we'll provide new water for the cows to drink, etc. And one guy in the back said, hey, fellas, all I know is they're going to ask us now, and they're willing to help pay, and my guess is 10 years from now, they're going to force us to do it, so I'm signing on. And everyone else signed on. So just having somebody to sort of break through, someone that they trust. Another example, following the September 2013 flood, a local property owner who had been in the community for a long time and never really showed tons of interest in natural resources, was a fisherman, worked in a completely different line of work other than natural resources, started inviting people over to his house because one of the few houses that was left in this area that had gotten wiped out, and invited folks over to his house and having potlucks, and started this idea of, could we fundraise around river restoration work and whatnot, and became quite the leader in the area. And then as projects got sort of contentious, or they were just needed some public input, and maybe it was going to be a little bit complicated, working it through him and having him deliver it and offering potluck was much more effective. On the other side of that, also during the flood, a very passionate person who was one of those people when they were talking, they would say a lot of things that you didn't agree with, but you wanted to be polite, and you're sort of nodding your head. And I caught myself nodding my head, thinking, all right, I'm agreeing to this guy. So I stopped nodding my head, and I just looked at him straight, and at some point says, do you know what I mean? And I knew if I said, sure, I know what you mean, he'd run away. And Sean said, and so I said, I hear the words you're using. I do not agree with what you're saying. And he later, at a meeting, said, I'm under the authority of St. Vrain and Left Hand Water Conservancy District, and we need to do X. And so, very passionate, had the ability to talk to people, but used it for bad, not for good. And so, be sort of careful and mindful. Similarly, another property owner in the same creek was one of those guys who didn't believe in any of this stuff prior to the flood, didn't believe in stream restoration work, didn't believe in water quality issues. It was divert the water for the farm and prior appropriation. And through the flood and through his work and working with Left Hand Watershed Center, one of our local watershed groups, became a great advocate. And there's actually a video out on YouTube where it talks about cooperating and working together, and they got this guy on the record in the camera saying we need to work together and this stuff works, and started to change some of the dynamics with some of the other organizations, a ditch company that he was on the directors, and they're now advocating for things that they've never thought of in over 100 years. So amazingly powerful those captains can be.
Okay. Oh, yes. Yeah. Go for it.
We'll talk about our own roles in just a minute.
Yeah.
Does anybody know Paul Boucher? Right. Paul Boucher is like the constant captain. He is a fly fishing guide. He's a rancher. He's like got boots on and a cowboy hat. Sometimes he has a flat brim hat. Like he kind of plays this like trusted role. No matter what he says, people eat it up. I'm not saying that he doesn't say great things. He does. I just mean he is my, like, when I imagine a captain, that's who I'm thinking about.
Great. Okay. So next we have Debbie Downer. And we all know this, like, on every project, there's like the naysayer, the roadblock. And just, you're going to be so tempted to like leave them out or go around them. But it's really important that Debbie Downer, you keep him or her involved in the project. And one thing is that, you know, it helps you not to have blinders on, right? And to understand like the flaws and be able to, you know, build a better project and to be able to respond to those and not be caught flat-footed. But also bringing this person along helps create some ownership and buy-in from them so they don't blow the project up at the very end when you have less ability to course correct for it. So who's got a good Debbie Downer story? Is that you?
Yeah, I have a brief one. Do you guys have? Yeah. Well, I think I think there are lots.
Several.
I think there are lots. I think in the public role, the key thing Julie said is to identify those folks that could kill your project at the end and bring them to the table at the beginning. And it can be exhausting sometimes. I'm going to use an example of a real thing that's going on right now, and it's difficult. Because nobody's going to be happy, but the City of Fort Collins is developing 1041 regulations right now, which is an opportunity to develop local regulatory, more environmental regulations, locally driven. And as we have gone through this, this is not my project, so it's easy for me to talk about, but the planner that is running this project from the start identified the most sort of emotionally driven environmental folks in our community. And she has had that person at the table from the beginning. At the same time, there have been umpteen meetings with our own water utility and other water districts and ditch companies, lots and lots of meetings. In the end of the day, we're taking both extremes and trying to make sure that they're heard. Also, in the end of the day, I think nobody's going to be happy. We probably will frustrate a lot of people because of the nature of this project, but there is a record of talking to these folks, and it gives the project in the end some more credibility that there was some public engagement, even though you can't always say yes to everybody's input.
So St. Vrain and Left-Hand Water Conservancy District some years ago went through basically a strategic plan. We called it a business plan, but basically a strategic plan, and worked with the board of directors and the community and our partners for a year plus on this plan. And I got 9 board of directors, and they were set to have a retreat, and the retreat was to really get into the plan and vote on the plan. And I ended up getting word that one of the directors was not at all happy with the plan. In fact, he thought it was a bait and switch, and he thought he was promised something else, and wrote a letter to the board of directors that they received the evening before the board meeting, and basically went into how he thinks it's not a good plan, and here's why, and so on and so forth. And so sadly, perhaps, he wasn't actually at the meeting. He wasn't at the retreat. So they read it into the record for the meeting, and then so there's 8 sitting there, and the 8 said, "I'm glad he did that. There's some things in there that we probably need to address. There's some other things where maybe we think he's not so on point on, but thanks for putting that in." and he was heard, and he felt comfortable and validated that he was heard. And the other 8 went forward and voted for it, and he ultimately ended up voting for a tax increase, which was part of the plan. And so I think that in this case, it was a real downer, and for me, being in that generalist position, I went through a range of emotions of taking it personally and wanting to fight and defend, but ultimately it was all the work that over the couple years of leading up to and getting buy-in, that it was all these other ingredients that sort of was able to balance all that out. And I think it made it more powerful in the end, having somebody that said, I think this isn't great. I think it was helpful. It was humbling to think that we didn't hit a grand slam and that everybody loves it. It was good to know that not everybody loves it, and it put some boundaries on how we might approach it. And again, there were nuggets of things that, maybe we can improve on that, and maybe we can message around that better. So the downer is there, and I would say it's sort of, as Jen pointed out, you almost have to find them and bring them into the fold, because I think it gives some more validation to the process where people are saying, yeah, okay, maybe we're not just preaching to ourselves. There's somebody here else that kind of gets what we're trying to achieve, but maybe doesn't like all the elements.
If I can just add to it, I think what you were saying is an important part of working with like a Debbie Downer. They come bearing the negative baggage that no matter what they say, it's bringing a project down or it's finding flaws in the project. When you can take their message away from their own voice or away from their own body, like it was written, you said it was written out, or if you can, kind of restate what they've said with not the negative, when you can pull the message away from the messenger, it is still that important message to address and to have brought along, but when you can do a little bit of separation from that person, it can make it not so bad.
Yeah. Okay. So we had to put this in because we know at this conference that we all think all projects are better with beavers. So we found, but this can be like a mindset or a person or a group, but it's really about like the persistence of keeping your eye on the goal, because your project it'll get torn down often many times. I mean, a lot of the projects that we hear about at this conference are like 10 years in the making, right? So keeping that eye on the goal and on the outcome. And I saw at the Yampa Basin Rendezvous a couple weeks ago, there was a presentation by Chuck Cullum, who is the new executive director of the Upper Colorado River Commission. So big, fancy job. And he gave a presentation that was all framed around Frozen 2 and the wisdom of Olaf. And with contending that it was a water movie on par with Chinatown. So it's pretty hilarious, but he had one of his pearls of wisdom from Olaf was well, when you don't know, sometimes the only thing you can do is the next right thing. And I think that's a little bit with the beavers, where you're just okay, well, I'm just gonna keep building this one piece that I know that I need next, even though you don't really, there's a lot of noise around.
Yeah, I think of a beaver too as being the kind of with the teeth and gnawing at things, And so I have a woman that I work with regularly. She's an emergency manager in our county, and she is so great at being the person that you've got a million things going on, and there's that one project that you keep dropping the ball on, and she keeps calling, and she's like, where are you on that project, and what do you need, and where can I go get it? And she comes back a week later with here's all the things you said you needed, and go do it. And I'm months later, all of that is falling apart again, and she's like, we got this, and she pulls it all back together, and she's and she does this year after year with me on different projects. And so I always, when we think about this person or the thing that's kind of keeps building it back up, even when it's been torn down, the one that's keeps dragging the log across the water, this is a wonderful piece of a team, a wonderful person that you can find, because I am maybe not that person. Sometimes.
Okay. I'm actually going to skip to duct tape first. Because this came from the same Yampa Basin Rendezvous. I saw a very dear old friend, and we were talking about how everybody's crushing on beavers these days. And she said, well, I've always said, you can fix anything with beavers and duct tape. And I was yes, okay, I took another idea there. But I think it's so true that all of these projects, like parts will like blow up or like a piece will fall off, and you have to make compromises, and you make patches to keep your boat afloat, and those compromises can make your nerd very upset. But I mean, you don't have time to make everybody, and like the luxury to really make it perfect. And I think the other piece of it is that you don't know what perfect is. I mean, until things are implemented and you can like monitor and measure, like you don't know. So I mean, 80%. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good is sort of the key thing. There will be duct tape involved, and it works. It can work really well. So just doesn't look pretty.
Thank God for duct tape. When we were thinking about this one, I did a stream management plan in our basin, and the complications in pulling together the stakeholder group. So, we had in the proposal for how we were going to do this plan, this like nice 12-person stakeholder group with representatives from like each of these key areas. And then as I started making the invitations for this group, inevitably somebody would say, well, I must bring, you've got to have that person, and I'm not participating unless that person participates, and I want to bring 2 people, and I want to bring 4 people, and trying to like just slap duct tape on it left and right. One of the biggest requests that I got was the key water rights holder that we needed in our stakeholder group, the person that could carry the whole reason we were doing the whole stream management plan. This one person had all the power, needed them there. They basically said, we're not showing up without our attorney, and you should pay for the attorney. And I'm like, oh God, okay. Slap that duct tape on there. He's going to bring his attorney. No one else can bring their attorney. And then the press is finding out about this. They're like, we want to participate. I'm like, no one's going to participate if we bring in the press. So like how do you tell the press they can't be there? So like figuring things like that out and constantly like making these maneuvers and these negotiations that, again, are not what you set out to do, but there are the way to get the project, keep the project moving forward, keep the ship moving, bring duct tape with you, slap it onto all the holes. And I was thinking about the Debbie Downer a minute ago. It's sometimes the Debbie Downer can turn into a grenade thrower. Right? We have those people that end the project with just bombing everything, and that's when you need the duct tape to kind of like patch all those holes that they just threw the grenade in.
Okay.
We all have duct tape stories.
Yeah.
You can keep going on that.
Okay, and lastly on our key ingredients. Oh, because sorry. I got out of order there. Okay. Fairy dust. So you will work and work over the years, and then like at some point the stars align and there's like this magical moment, and it could be like someone retires, or like the funding is suddenly there, like, or someone says like, I have a great idea, and it's like the idea you've been saying for 8 years, but like the right person has that. So I think looking for that time when like the stars align after years of work. And being able to recognize it and seize that opportunity.
So a few examples along those lines. One is a project that we're embarking on of a kind of a bypass, a diversion that has existed for well over 100 years, complete dry up in the mountains, and like hardcore old school ditch company. Like any attempt at ever talking about their diversion and doing anything with that diversion is met with not only a no, but a hell no, and go pound sand. And Colorado Water Trust, Nature Conservancy, lots of organizations have tried to put their attempts at trying to have them see life a little differently, and lots and lots of ending with sad results. And St. Vrain Left-Hand Water Conservancy District was called to a meeting with them, and Jenny McCarty in my office and I went there, and they met with us on a couple of different topics, and one of the topics was, so we're thinking that maybe we could bypass some water past that diversion. And so we had an actual discussion with them, and I walked out, and Jenny, I think, was on the job for like 3 months, I think, at that point, and I looked over at her and I said, I'm so effing jealous of the fact that the moon's aligned, the stars aligned, and you get to work on this really cool project that lots of people have tried to attempt to do over 100 years. And the motivating factor is the superintendent's getting older, and it's up in the mountains, and it takes like a day to go up there and work it, and he wants to do an automated gate, and while you're automating it, could you just tighten up the flows a little bit? And if you tighten up the flows, could some flows go past the diversion? And, you know, all again sort of bypassy to us, but to them totally like a function of, I'm just tired of going up there. The moon's aligned. We just got a little fairy dust, and now we're off and running, and it's going to be awesome, and I'm so effing jealous. The other thing is, it's sort of a, you know, making a good thing out of a tragedy. I think we all have stories of wildfires. For St. Vrain Left-Hand Water Conservancy District, I mentioned the ballot question earlier. We were on the ballot while the fires were burning in our watershed, and we had a campaign that me, as for the record, as a local representative, I was not part of the campaign, but I heard rumors that they were talking about writing a letter to the editor saying this is why you, the voters, should vote for something like this, is because this money could go towards pre-fire mitigation strategies. And so there was a letter that was written. It was very classy. I was concerned about it coming across as very self-serving and bad timing and in bad form, but it was done very respectfully of what was occurring and people losing their homes, and really just an eye on the future. And again, it's you know, it's a sad situation, but the timing worked out, and the ballot question passed by almost 70%. I don't think that's the sole reason, but it certainly was helpful. The other one, similarly on a natural disaster front, was the 2013 flood. You know, for years and years and years, people talking about diversion structures and fish passage and those kinds of things. And, you know, much like the other story I told you, it was no and hell no. When the 13 flood came through for St. Vrain, many of the diversions were completely wiped out, just zero, nothing there. Had to be built from scratch. And so we reached out to our local governments and the state governments, and we held a meeting, and I'll remember it like it was yesterday. We shut the doors. It was a room about a quarter this size, and I looked everyone in the eye, and I said, forgive the harshness of this, the bodies aren't cold yet, and it is tragic because there were some deaths in there, but we were talking about fish passage while they were flying sorties to rescue people. The reason we were doing it is I knew the lead time we needed to have to deploy what is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity where you had a completely blank slate to rebuild diversions. But it took that opportunity to have that discussion. And in the room, we started mapping out what would fish passage look like. Taking advantage of those situations, a little pixie dust. Again, two stories that are ultimately somewhat tragic, but I guess it's an annual tradition in Colorado to have natural disasters, so being prepared to take advantage of those is sort of the pixie dust.
Okay, so does anyone have any other key ingredients that they would like to add to the list? Or a story about something on the list? Yeah.
You went to 6, then you went to 5. Is there something after 6?
The second part of the, yeah. But thanks for reminding me of the slides, 'cause, yeah.
Nerd in the audience.
Yeah, yeah.
Nerd.
Yeah.
I have an alternate take on your Debbie Downer, and that is the idea of a threat forecaster. So my mind just goes there instantly. Like, I'll be with an amazing group of nerds and coming up with all these ideas, and my brain instantly goes to, what are the challenges we're going to face to meet that objective? And so it's not that I'm trying to shut down the brainstorming or the ideas, but it's like, what are the obstacles going to be to get us there? And so there's just an alternate sort of twist on that Debbie Downer, and that's threat forecaster.
Yes, I like it. We'll add it. We'll add it. What would the picture be for that one? No, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, Josh, I was just going to say that's what a Debbie Downer would say.
Oh, are we like totally over? No. Oh, okay.
I think there's a workhorse,
the one that doesn't really have much to say, but everyone comes with all these ideas, and then they kind of be like, you take it and go with it, and they get work done.
Yeah. Actually, that might be a little bit like, I think, we have these ingredients, but I think that that's a little bit of like the project manager or the generalist or the person behind the scenes that's like doing the work to pull this all together. Thanks, Lindsay.
What the Debbie Downer? What did you call it? What was your twist? Threat forecaster. I like that. And we'll pivot to it in terms of some of the generalist role. The community discussions you have, we've got to be. You tone me down. The community discussions we'll have about these projects, the generalist has got to play that role of hearing the Debbie Downer or hearing the nerd and hearing and translating a lot, because some folks in the room might hear the threat forecaster and hear it for its genuine, what it's intended to do is, had we thought of this, we need to make sure we don't step on this landmine. Some come away the room going, my God, the sky is falling, or there's all these problems, we couldn't possibly address all those problems. I'm not coming back. And so we're constantly, as the generalists, sort of listening to that and retranslating and re-rallying and bringing it back around and constantly riding that balance of, acknowledging those challenges into the future. Okay, I keep going. You gonna turn me down again? All right, I'm good. All right. So we came up with additional ingredients, these more in the what makes up the generalist. And we thought we'd have a little fun with it by playing a game. You may be familiar with these games when you were in elementary school, and I forgot what the heck they're called. Rebus, thank you. So you might be familiar with, you sort of take a picture and another picture and you put the words together. So as an example, there might be a picture of an arm, and then there might be a picture of a chair, and you put that together and it's, there you go, such a smart group. These are way freaking harder. All right. So this is where you engage your brains, and we're going to give you a moment to sort of think about it. So first ingredient. So think it through. Think it through. Curious. I hear curious is right. Curious what? Chef. Yep. Doedy. Curious chef. So who?
This is a group of nerds. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. So we're talking about the ingredients that we, or the characteristics that we find as generalists that we kind of all share.
Like skills we've learned.
Skills we've learned, yeah. And so Curious Chef is like, when I think about the person that is, or I feel like I constantly ask questions, okay? If you know anything about me, I just ask a ton of questions. I statistically hope that one of them is the right question. If you ask a whole bunch, you're gonna get there. And so I don't always know where I'm going or why I'm asking a lot of questions, but I'm kind of taking those answers and just putting them in my back pocket, and then later I pull them all out. And so one example of how I've done this recently is I've been in this role as the executive director of the Ruedi Water and Power Authority for 4 years. And so I started it in 2018, which was a drought. And I noticed that all of the water stored in Ruedi Reservoir was not being used. And I'm like, if we're not using the water during a drought, when are we using that water? So I started asking a lot of questions about the contracts and the way that they're written and who administers the contracts and how does the water get to one place to the other and why aren't the people using their contract water? And it took a few years of asking all of these questions, and as a generalist, kind of knowing to go to the legal person for this question, the contract owner for this question, the state engineer for this question, and kind of the community about how can we begin, where is the water needed, who would ask for it when it was needed, and like, again, just asking tons of questions and back pocketing this. This July, kind of all came together. I think there was some pixie dust involved. But essentially, within 2 days, I found out that the Bureau of Reclamation could recognize contract water in Ruedi to be released for temperature improvements on the streams below them. And so then I called the state engineer and I said, can you administer it in that way? And they said yes. And so then I called all of these contract water rights holders and said, could you release some of your water in 2 days? And they said yes. And I think the kind of the role of this generalist idea is that I, first of all, had built a ton of relationships so that people would take my phone call when I said I have an emergency and have to talk to you today. I had to do that with probably 15 different people. And to pull something together, to have it happen in 2 days, I would say I was just pulling together lots of ingredients to make something really cool happen, which was 10 days of 50 CFS in a river that was burning up. So that's an example of how a curious chef is a generalist.
Can I add something to that?
You can, but I have the ability to cut you off, so go ahead.
I just want to, the point of being curious, something that's been on my mind a lot lately is being open-minded to door number 3. So many projects are like all in or you don't do the project. Or you've got your alternatives and you've been thinking about 3 alternatives for 10 years. And in more than one of my projects in totally different spheres, in the past 3 months, door number 3 has opened, and it's kind of blown my mind. Like, oh, we need to think of this completely other option that no one was talking about, even though lots of good minds were on this project for a very long time. So I think being curious and being aware that there is another way that you just can't even conceive in 1 year that it could happen is a big piece of being successful.
Thank you both. So our next ingredient. Shout it, shout it. Hint, it's not Axel something. It's not Rose something. This one's really hard. It's a song. It was sort of acoustic-y. I think I heard it. This one's brutal. One. Patience. The groans. It's like a bad dad joke. What's the next one? What does that dog do? Herd? So patient herder is what we came up with this one. Beer was involved. Jen?
Oh, click it one time. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So the patient herder.
Hint. Start thinking now.
I'm not even going to talk because they're going to be distracted. I think this is like the crux of a lot of what we do a lot of the time. One, we're all in water, so patience is key because it takes 10 years to have a conversation about anything. Or the patience idea here is really keep lobbying, keep throwing the seeds out there, and 1 year the pixie dust is going to land and you might get lucky, but to be patient but persistent. And then the herding part is just, I think in our roles, we may have consultants who are looking at a subset of the project, which is the core of the project, but the actual project is a bigger thing. You've got communications upwards, sideways, downwards. You've got different people to respond to. You've got budgets. And so it's this notion of having multifaceted, complex projects. And in this particular role, we've got to see the big picture and allow others to focus on pieces of it. And so we're constantly hurting. And that can be a big job.
Others to add to that? Nope, we're good. We call it thinking in the third dimension, that everything's connected and affects each other. So next one. Second one's right, gambler, something gambler. No. Think more job policy, not the person necessarily. Not patient gambler, we would have used Axl Rose again. Secretary, no. Diplomatic.
Well done, Nicole.
You've missed your calling.
Yeah.
Julie?
So if you sit on a basin roundtable, you know where we're headed with this one, right? With the diplomatic gambler, because it's a lot of like reading the faces and figuring out when it's worth playing your cards or not. But the project that I was really thinking about on this one is we have a really fantastic opportunity for a river restoration project in Steamboat on city lands. And it hasn't gone anywhere, even though it's been talked about for several years, because the stakeholders can't agree on just sort of the basic philosophy of the design. And about a year ago, we started a process again with a nonprofit kind of leading the design process to get a conceptual design. And kind of immediately we're stuck into this philosophical discussion. Well, it's even maybe making it sound more sophisticated than it was, but I have been to this conference like a bunch of times, and I worked on flood recovery projects with consultant teams, and had learned about this idea of process-based restoration versus form-based, and had some ideas about where I philosophically wanted this project to at least start, recognizing that it's within the city and it has a lot of limitations, but at least start with a certain mindset. But we have a very key stakeholder that looks at it like really completely differently on what they see that they think the river is going to do and what they want it to do. And so it's been this. I can't lose this stakeholder. Like, it will fall apart. So I have to figure out how do we bring them along with us, but yet not at the expense of what I think is the best for the river and the community. So it's like a lot of diplomacy, but also like figuring out when, I will fall on my sword for this one if I have to, but I only want to play that card if I absolutely have to. So I think, anyone else have a diplomatic gambler story they want to?
This isn't so much a story, it's just a thought that, going back to the nerds and the science, sometimes decisions are not made in the scientific sphere. The decision space is something different. It's legal, it's political. And so being that diplomat, you've got the nerds telling you this great science. They might be telling you the sky is falling. Likely they're telling you the sky is falling. But bringing that message and the numbers is not going to be productive. So you have to think about how to bring the message in like the softest, most gentle form to be effective, and being diplomatic, even though I want to speak from the scientific, from the numbers, from the rationale.
You may want to bring the fire chief with you for that message.
Nerds in the closet, bring the fire chief. Is that what you're saying?
Similarly, working in the water space, it's inherently got a legal component to it, and you might be working with boards and commissions, and oftentimes they'll have their trusted advisor, the attorney, and it's hard to sort of argue against the law. And it's just, and so you might be asking that organization to gamble a little bit, to actually take a risk that, the legal advisor is saying there is risk inherent here, and this is your risks, and helping them get comfortable with those risks. And taking a gamble when maybe the science doesn't necessarily say yes or no and give them definitive, and maybe the law says, yeah, you could, but it'd be safer to say no. So having that gambler. Next one. We were well into beer at this point, so the owl is more about what the owl does. It's a certain kind of owl, right?
It's a gray-horned owl.
Gray-horned owl who raids nests. Like, doesn't even build his own, apparently. Sort of close. Opportunistic.
Opportunistic is the owl.
Opportunist. And then we read the definition of opportunist, and we're going to share that with you in a minute, and it didn't sit well with us, so we added this lovely lady. Altruistic, somebody say that? Close enough? We're moving on because you guys are tired of this. Altruistic opportunist. And we want to read you that definition of opportunism. Is that it?
Yeah. So, I've kind of always considered myself an opportunist until I looked up the definition of it, and it's horrible. This one particularly says opportunism is taking advantage of situations and people in a self-centered way without regard to consequences. Moving in on a dead person's wife is a classic example of an opportunist. I mean, I may never use the word again, except for today.
Julie, you want to follow that up?
Yeah. You want to explain how we're all opportunists now?
Yeah, well, and I didn't really have the negative connotation either until we read the definition. And now, so we're thinking about this as like an altruistic opportunism. So it's not self-motivated, it's for the greater good. And we almost, so in my job, the predecessor in my job, some of you may know, she's at this conference a lot of many years, Kelly Romero Heaney. She is sort of her superpower is to be like, oh, there's a really good looking nest over there. Like, she is really great at seeing opportunities. And I worked with her on a project before I worked for the city, the stream management plan for Steamboat Springs. And so Steamboat our stretch of the Yampa is on the EPA's impaired water body list for water temperature. Went on a few years ago, and this has implications for our discharge permit at our wastewater treatment facility for more stringent limits. But at the same time, we're like, well, we don't really, it's a temperature issue along this whole segment. It's really just that discharge. But we wanted to understand more about, well, what's really the problem? What's causing it? Is it natural? Is it climate change? Is it human-induced? And this was kind of right at the same time that the Colorado Water Plan, the original one had gotten finished, and there was money for stream management plans. And so Kelly saw this great opportunity to be like, oh, well, we'll get the state to give us some money to study our temperature issue. So that sat well with city council, but at the same time, she could do all the kind of river health assessment that she wanted to do anyway with the money. And so that was a great opportunity and so Steamboat was one of the first places to get a grant for a stream management plan and to complete one. But then as we did the stream management plan, there was modeling that LODIC did for stream flow and water temperature and air temperature. And one of the findings is that there is certain times of the year when increasing the riparian shading, kind of reducing that solar loading, can help to prevent water temperature exceedances from state standards. And so Kelly recognized that there was a nonprofit had this volunteers planting trees once a year, and took that program and applied for a grant from the CWCB and from the Roundtable for money to plant trees all along city land, like working with that organization, just like blew that project up with $150,000 of grant money, got trees from the Colorado State Forest Service, got kids to plant the trees, and now we're in like our 4th year of that program. We have a new grant from the Colorado River District, but it was just like seeing a little opportunity there and being like, well, that nest will work great. Why build a new one? and so she's been a great inspiration. But I always think we almost had like a equal sign with her picture after this slide. But I'm gonna add real quick.
For the record, Kelly's not moving in on a dead man's wife.
I think when I think about opportunists, being an opportunist, I'm also thinking about constantly funding and politics, right? So when the elected officials when you have a group of elected officials that want to make progress on something that you've had in your capital plan that's 10 years out, you bump that up to right now, right? You just make those changes really quickly. So when the funding's there, you move, and when the elected officials are there, you move things around. Okay.
So in recognition that all of you have great stories, we wanted to put it back out to you. What did we miss as far as ingredients for generalists? And you don't have to put it in rebus form. You can put it in plain speak, sober. Yes, sir.
I would say a key ingredient is Michelle Obama.
Okay, yeah, tell us.
Who wouldn't want Michelle Obama on your team? But, simply when they go low, we go high.
Oh, okay. I like it.
I would say an important ingredient for generalists, and probably everyone up here on the panel, are people who are visionaries. They can see what doesn't exist yet, and they have an idea of what the world could be, and they inspire others to then pursue those projects as well.
Great, thanks.
So another phrase for Debbie Downer that people may have used is devil's advocate. A lot of times we picked somebody and said, that's your job. So a lot of times what I think about in a problem is figuring out the mechanics. So you might need a nerdy person, just doesn't have to be perfect, but figure out how it's going to work, fine-tuning it, and then scaling it. And those things together, whoever the people are, you can get to the end. Mechanics of a problem, solving it, fine-tuning it, and scaling it.
Yeah, those are awesome additions. I am going to try to wrap us up, and then we have time for questions. Essentially putting this, build your team. That was the first part of our presentation. Bring your woo, bring your generalist. We've spent a lot of time talking about this, and inevitably we feel arrogant, and so we're not trying to say that we have ingredients that have to be on a team. We just found that we are sitting in this same space in local government, and that we're constantly kind of doing the same job of like trying to bring together the right people, trying to push the project forward, and that we share traits that we find helpful. We think that when you're talking about those key ingredients to a team, those are key ingredients. And so I just want to encourage all of you to become more aware of your strength, own it, bring it to the team, and also start paying attention to who in your community has these other strengths, and start back pocketing all of this information of that person is really good at doing this thing, and thinking about how they can fit into a project to help you. I also wanted to just say that I didn't start as a generalist. I certainly was an idealist when I was younger, not that I'm old. And I also am super competitive. And so I think the competitiveness kind of beat me out. I wanted to win, and I found that being an idealist didn't get me a lot of wins, right? It was too rigid. And so I'm kind of transitioned over to this generalist area where I feel like I get a lot more wins that way. And so it's not that you're ever stuck in a role. It's not that you're stuck with your strengths and that they can't change, or that you don't flex different muscles at different times for different projects and in different teams. Is there anything else that you guys want to add in wrapping us up? Because I'm about to turn it over to questions.
So I think one of the things that we discovered in our discussion is that everyone's going to have a journey in their career, and some may find themselves going towards this generalist sort of point in your career. And as Jen alluded to earlier, there might even be a mourning period of I'm no longer the technical person doing this particular thing. And some may actually find that they weren't necessarily being asked to put in, that they're just in the role. And what we really talked about is it needs all those things. It really, we made fun of the nerd, but we need the nerd. We need all those ingredients to come together. And so when you're working on your projects and you might see that maybe you don't have the generalist and you have too many nerds, it might be time to sort of evaluate that and look at that. And similarly, if you have too many generalists, you just have a lot of fun talking to each other, but may not get anything done. So you really have to explore that. And so really sort of approach these processes from a sort of a Myers-Briggs-esque sort of personality, like who do we have in the room, and then explore your own path and journey and being authentic to yourself. Be true to yourself and what you bring to the table. And if you have that generalist, if you have that ability and you can bring all that together, awesome, run with it. If you don't, embrace being the nerd or whatever that other is and be the best nerd that you can be. Or Debbie Downer. She's still cool.
All right, we only have 1 minute. If there was, we have 5 minutes? We have 5 minutes. Any questions for the? Don't be bashful.
Is anybody thinking about what happens when there's too many beavers?
No such thing.
Is that being a devil's advocate?
Like you can't have too much cowbell, is that?
I'm just curious, as you guys went through these conversations, what you learned about yourself that you didn't previously know, or if you had any epiphanies about language or just anything that was new to you in this conversation, including what beer you now like that you tried?
Yeah, I think that like maybe I knew it somewhere in there, but didn't acknowledge it very much. Like, I would say I'm not the greatest diplomat. Like, I could probably work on that pretty hard. That would help me in my generalist role. I would also say, like, it's been fun talking to all of these people who I've known some of you for a long time, and like seeing Julie play out the role that I knew she would play. Like, Julie's a planner. Julie's gonna make sure we have a plan. Julie's gonna type all this out. She's gonna like, and Julie knowing that I'm the procrastinator, and I'm like, I will show up.
Jen, as she said, she was sort of the spark of all this, and she saw something of each of us that I hadn't really ever thought about as this generalist. I said project manager or executive director and those kinds of things, but it really got me thinking about what the value of that in projects, and so I just appreciated getting the time to sort of think that through and think about these ingredients, and I'm really glad we had fun with it, because it would kind of get depressing to be overly technical on it, but lots of sort of self-reflection on how do I fit in there, and whether or not those ingredients are really relatable to me.
I was curious how kind of now we have a little bit of self-awareness of these key components, and kind of how you look towards staffing in the future in terms of looking what your team needs and kind of complementing yourselves and the teams that you all manage and work with.
I mean, I would just say it came up in my own head too, that I think thinking like this helps you build a good team. And realizing when your team member behaves really different than how you would, that's an awesome thing, and trying to really step back and understand that rather than get frustrated because they behave differently than you do. So I think the compliments are really important.
We added a couple of new folks. Jenny, I mentioned earlier, Scott Griebling is there over the last year, and it was pretty conscious of me, and it wasn't because I knew I needed other people like a Beaver or whatever. I knew I was really attracted to me, and I was afraid I'd hire myself, and barely enough room in a room for me. If we had 3 me's, it would be exhausting. So it was really intentionally to just avoid that. And again, having gone through this experience, it was neat to sort of pick out those ingredients and see how we're building our team.
All right, well, we're going to have to wrap it up, so let's give our panel a round of applause. And stick around, or if you need to shuffle, and we'll bring up our next presentation, which I'll tell you what that is in 1 second.